in political science. Her publications focus on activism, social movements, the intersection of gender, race, social class, and sexualities in behavior, identity, and politics. She has published dozens of articles, book chapters, and reviews on these topics. Examples include her review essay, Dissent is Patriotic, which appears in the Tulsa Law Review in 2015 and is one of her favorite publications. She also published the South Carolina Confederate Flag, The Politics of Race and Citizenship in 2001 with two graduate students, Chris Dolan and Angela Ledford, in the Journal of Politics and Policy. Dr. Woliver has also published 3 books. The latest one is entitled Push Back, Move Forward, the National Council of Women's Organizations and Coalition Advocacy, with Temple University Press in 2018. Currently, she is honored to be the president of the League of Women Voters, Columbia area. Let's all give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming in this turbulent weather. It's hard to drive, park, get to the buildings. I really appreciate you being here. So I'm Laura Woliver, and I want to tell you a little bit about my self and about some of the connections that I have with Governor West. So it's interesting how things kind of circle around, and as you go through your life, you'll see that that happens. Governor West used to come to classes at USC as a guest speaker and talk about his experiences in the legislature, in business, and then in the governorship, and as ambassador. He was a very good speaker, and he would refer to events that happened during his political career. He often came to my class that was about social movements, and I asked him to come because he would talk in my social movements class about being in the legislature of South Carolina and then being the governor, doing a lot of the activities about civil rights vis-a-vis race discrimination and racial justice. He told stories, for example, and he was politically active during the 70s, 1970s, 80s, and the beginning of the 90s. Well, he probably was retired by the 90s, but he would speak to my classes in the 1990s. He would tell stories about the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina, and the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, what they did to suppress voting rights, and what they did to intimidate politicians who, in his words, broke ranks against race discrimination. And I'm going to talk about some of these things in my comments today. To me, and to many others, he seemed to be one of the good people. Okay, and my talk is called Go Up the River, Good People, Social Policy, and Women's Activism. Getting ahead of myself here. So he seemed to be one of the good people. Not perfect, not many people are perfect, but one of the good ones. So today I want to talk about activism, citizen engagement, the intersections of gender, race, class, sexuality, right, intersectionality. And I want to talk about good people and also social policies. Good people, what I mean by good people is people who do things one at a time, a piece of change at a time. They help people. They clean up the environment. They do things that are for the good of the community, one at a time. They volunteer. How many of you in this room volunteer? I'm a volunteer. The League of Women Voters is all volunteers. So you know you volunteer for things, and it's rewarding, and you make a difference. So one at a time volunteering, good people do this, and we're grateful for it, and it makes a difference. But there's also the thing called systematic change, okay? When there can be people who come together to make a situation such that there's less of a need for doing good deeds to rescue people or to help them. And I'm going to talk about that. Many of the examples that I use will be about women being active, because that's what I've studied for my whole academic career. And I've also studied social movements in reaction to that and allies that surround that. Now, I want to, first of all, just throw down a marker, because when people talk about women, okay, you need to remember that you're talking about the majority of this country. When you talk about women, you're talking about the majority of the population, the majority of the voters, the majority of the taxpayers, and the people who do more than the majority of the work in most families and countries. So, women should always be part of the picture, not hidden, not discussed. Women should not be hidden. Did any of you see the movie Hidden Figures? Did you see that? Yeah. So the title is wonderful, right? Hidden Figures, and these are mathematicians and computer people figures. And that movie was about African American women who saved the bacon of NASA, right? Over and over again in the initial space program. And they were hidden. African American women, mathematicians and computer whizzes. So women should not be what we call eluded or put in the shadows or the background or be a footnote in history, but a central part of our discussions about behavior and social systems. Now, I put on this slide some of the terms that I'm going to use, and I understand that this is a community event, which I love. This event has people who are from all kinds of majors. So I didn't do this because I think you don't know these words, but just in case you haven't come across them before, or the way I say them, you don't recognize them, okay? The other thing I want to say before I start is I'm really proud to be here. I love Winthrop University. I've bragged about it to my neighbors and told many people, your children should look at Winthrop. That's a cool place. I've been here for conferences. I've been here for a Women's Studies conference. Some of my favorite colleagues in political science and the social sciences teach here, and so I'm really happy to be here. Now, people without official power have changed things all the time. Sometimes, though, we haven't noticed it. They've challenged authority, demanded rights and human dignity forever and ever. It has always happened. But what do we know about these people? Often we don't know much. We don't know much about labor union history in this country. We don't know much about First Nation people or large social movements where people cooperated together and created things that lasted, like communes, co-ops. If any of you are farmers or come from farmer families, you might know that many of the institutions in the agricultural community of the United States are actually co-ops. Okay, grain co-ops, farmers co-ops, housing co-ops, public health, neighborhood cleanups, building playgrounds that are for the public's use, not for the private neighborhood's use, but for the public. Or you don't know about how some people, in the words of some of my students, make a way out of no way. Have you heard of that? You make a way out of no way. African American people in South Carolina, for example, built colleges for themselves with their own hands. Okay? They were masons, bricklayers, carpenters. They could build a roof. Okay? They had skills. On their days off, on the weekends, at night, they built Allen University and Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. These institutions didn't just happen. If you drive by them, okay, if you drive by them, think of where did they come from. They were concerted community efforts by people who erected these buildings knowing they would never enroll there. Okay? They were the adults, and they were playing what is called in social movements and social behavior. They were playing a long game. They built those institutions. They were the most oppressed and beleaguered citizens in the area, and they did it for other people going forward. One of my friends, who's my age, and she is an African-American friend of mine, told me a story about growing up in Columbia, South Carolina. Okay, so she grew up in Columbia, South Carolina in the 60s and 70s and 80s, okay? And she told me that her father was a carpenter and that she and her siblings went to public schools in Columbia, South Carolina. Of course, at that time, they were all segregated. And she told me that she was a favorite. She and her siblings were big-time favorites in those schools because if those children were placed into teachers' classrooms, those teachers rejoiced because her father would come in and out of nothing build bookcases for the teachers. Out of nothing. So he did that. So what do we know about some of the biggest movements in our country? And what do we know about people who stood up? Very often, what we know is a sanitized version of what happened. This is a slide of Abigail Adams. Okay? And Abigail Adams was an elite white woman in Concord, Massachusetts. She was married to John Adams. And John Adams was at the Constitutional Convention. He was one of the founders. He also became President of the United States. And then their son, John Quincy Adams, became President of the United States. Have any of you seen the movie Amistad? Yes. Okay, you put this on your list right now. Before you die or you think you're a complete human being, you must see the movie Amistad. Okay? In this movie, the white attorney who defends the enslaved people who rebel against in the slave ship, okay, is John Quincy Adams. All right. So what do we know about these people? Not a lot. I want to go over women's activism a little bit here. The centennial of women's suffrage is this summer. Okay, you guys write that down too. August 26th, 2020 is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage. Women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment, was the biggest expansion of the suffrage in this country's history. The biggest one ever, okay? Women are the majority, all right? The 19th Amendment, right to vote, biggest, okay? But often, women's suffrage is not mentioned in our histories or our politics classes unless you have fabulous professors, right, who bring in women's history and politics. We don't know much about it. Now, in politics, as you know, words matter a lot. It matters in law. It matters in contracts. You don't trifle with words. They matter a lot. So, women, let's get this straight. Let's get these words straight. Women were not given the right to vote. As Frederick Douglass taught us in 1857, quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress, since power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will." Women won the right to vote. Women fought for the right to vote. They were uppity. They were loud. They were disrespectful. They were unladylike, okay, for more than 70 years before they won the right to vote. Now, the right to vote can't be given to anyone because under liberalism, a philosophy of liberalism, it is inherent, endemic, it is in you as a human being, your rights. So people don't give your rights to you. They might take them away, they might oppress you, but you have an inherent right to certain liberties in certain political systems. So, when the women won the right to vote, it was a social policy. It was actually a right, okay? And these rights, and I'll come back to these topics in a few minutes, this is part of liberalism. Liberalism is not about, those liberals. Liberalism is a philosophy about individual human rights, okay? Inherent within the person, no matter what. That's liberalism. And as a right, then, it applied to all women. Now, this was a problem for some people, because all women would include black women, right? And all women would include Hispanic women and poor women, okay? Not just the elite. If all women had the right to vote, it was a universal right. Of course, a universal right in practice can be different. So when women won the right to vote, the suffragists and their allies realized they were working to become agents of their own fate. They were exercising agency. They were no longer dependents or subjects, but citizens on their own. Now, I want to also get some facts straight. You must be clear about the facts, okay? As academics, we still care about the facts, okay? About truth, okay? The 19th Amendment, the facts are, was not implemented fairly. Powerful forces in this country, particularly in the Southeast, continued racial and income disenfranchisement despite the women's suffrage victory, okay? The poll tax, the literacy clauses, the Jim Crow legislation. Now, intersectional generations of activists continued to fight for democratic representation, democratic with a small d, which is the philosophy, and won the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Now, I want to also say it's important to remember that in the 19th century, the 18th century, all of the centuries, some women were complicit and active participants in repressing people's votes, okay? And in using race to divide people, okay? Race can be used to divide a lot of people, including women. I'll get to that in a minute. And they benefited, or at least they thought they benefited, from a white male-dominated status quo, all right? White women might have thought, the status quo benefits me. So, but Abigail Adams and a lot of other people knew that dependence on a benevolent patriarchal protector was fragile. Okay, if anything happened to your protector, okay, if anything happened to your white male who was going to be nice to you, okay, not hurt you, anything happened, he died, he disappeared, he became ill, he changed his mind, you had no rights, okay? So your safety was fragile. You could be considered lucky, okay? You had a loving, wonderful male spouse, okay? Or a father who cared about you and let you go to school as a woman, even though you were a woman. But that was luck. Luck is different than a right, okay? That was lucky. So Abigail Adams brought this up. A lot of people don't know this. Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John Adams, of the Adams family. This is a different Adams family than Morticia's Adams family, right? You guys know that. Concord, Massachusetts, 1700s. Okay, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John, hope you're having a good time in Philadelphia with all your pals, writing the new government. You know, I'm taking care of the farm, all the kids, all the animals, all the crops, all this and that. And I just want you to please remember the ladies, okay, when you write this new government. Now, she did write that. That might ring a bell in our minds. Okay, maybe you've heard that. And I would say hallelujah if you heard that. That she said, remember, she wrote, remember the ladies. Okay. But sometimes that's all we know that she wrote. Remember the ladies. And remember the ladies is sort of a sanitized version, okay? This is a trouble when you teach women how to read and write, right? So she continued. She said, do not put unlimited power into the hands of husbands. I'm quoting from her letter. Remember, okay, this is this woman, blue blood, white, rich, Concord, Massachusetts. Lots of lace and pearls, right? Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. In particular, care and attention is not made to, if care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a revolution and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex, she's talking to her husband who, by the way, she loved, okay, your sex are naturally tyrannical. It's a truth thoroughly established and bears no dispute. That's not in our master narrative, right? That's not in our sort of lessons that she said, you do this. This is not a democracy. It's a patriarchy, okay? So who knew that such a foremother, Abigail Adams, was so radical in her feminism, in her democratic sense, okay, about liberalism, human rights? Not many people. How many of us know about the Grimke sisters? Yay! So I taught at USC forever, before you guys were born, many of you. This is astonishing to me. And it's wonderful over the years how some people knew who the Grimke sisters were. But at the beginning, nobody. The Grimke sisters, here's a picture of them. The Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina Grimke, were from Charleston. They were from what's called a blue blood family, which is a term nobody understands unless they're from the South. And their father was a judge and a senator in the South Carolina legislature, and he was a slave holder. He had a lot of slaves. He was a plantation person, master, and he and his big family lived in Charleston in order to be in a pretty city and engage in this Charleston social scene. Eventually, Sarah and Angelina, who had witnessed the details and the actual day-to-day practice of enslaving other human beings, wound up in Philadelphia, and one of them wrote a letter that William Lloyd Garrison published in The Liberator. He was an abolitionist, very radical abolitionist. And her letter was entitled, A Voice from the South. Okay, A Voice from the South. Now, at the time, children and women were to be seen and not heard. Okay? A voice from the South. At the time, this is about 20 years before the Civil War. At the time, the master narrative was that the South had a unique institution that was basically benign and patriarchal, okay? And that it was a unique system that other people wouldn't understand. You're not from around here, you don't understand our system. And the things that the abolitionists say about us is wrong. So she wrote, I am from Charleston, South Carolina. I was born and raised there. Here's what I saw. She talked about systematic rape. She talked about the beatings, the killings, the abductions, the cruelty. And the mayor of Charleston, when he heard about it, he said the Grimke sisters would do themselves a big favor for their personal safety to never return to the city of Charleston. Okay, that's how gracious Southern hospitality is if you speak the truth. Sometimes, right? So the Grimke sisters, they campaigned all over this country against slavery and women's rights. They knew and they noticed that half the slaves were also women. Okay? And they were very effective with their voice because they had seen it with their own eyes. They testified as witnesses. So, the Grimke sisters. There's a monument now in Charleston, in front, a small placard in front of the house where they were raised in Charleston, and it was revealed just about 10 years ago. First thing about the Grimke sisters. that I know of. Now, the other people that we might not know about are people who resisted other kinds of people with a lot of power. So I want to turn to this case. I know you can't read that probably, but I put it up there just so you can follow along. This is something you might not have known about Tillman. And yes, this is the Tillman family. That family, yes. So this is a case out of the South Carolina Supreme Court. Okay, and what happens, you can read it, is, as you know, and when I drove here this morning, I drove past Tillman Hall, I drove on Tillman Road, or whatever it's called. So it's amazing, right? So what happened was, Benjamin Tillman, his nickname was Pitchfork Ben Tillman, had been governor of South Carolina, and then he became a U.S. Senator from South Carolina. And he was part of a very powerful political machine. Okay, you didn't mess with him, all right? He was a kingmaker. The law did not apply to him in many ways. He was very powerful. He had a son whose name was Benjamin Tillman III, right? And he was known as BR. And Benjamin Tillman III had married a woman named Lucy Dugas. Lucy Dugas, let me tell you about her. She was a white woman, and she was from Charleston. Her family were very wealthy. They were considered upper-class Charleston people. When she married Ben Tillman's son, people said she had married down, okay? Married down. He wasn't of her social class, okay? Ben Tillman Pitchfork Ben was a populist, and he was an agrarian populist, and he wasn't born into wealth, okay? He gained wealth from his politics. But, so people in Charleston felt sorry for Lucy Dugas for marrying into that no-count family. All right, that's just a gossip. In 1909, now, Tillman's son was a widely known alcoholic and gambler, all right? Now, I need to stop now and tell you about something called coverture. Coverture was the law of the land. I put it on those terms. Coverture meant you don't have to worry, little lady, because your man will take care of you. And the law covers you through your man, okay? So if you are a child, your father, your grandfather, your uncle, your guardian will speak for you, do for you, protect you. And when you're a grown woman, if you're not married, same thing will happen. Your father, your brother, your son, okay, and your son would be, of course, much younger than you are, would be your man, coverture. If you married, when you married, your husband was your guardian. He was the master, coverture, okay? Everything that was in that house belonged to him. The clothes on your back, the tools you used in the kitchen, your own children, they belonged to the man, all right? And that was coverture. Now, you could be lucky, as I said, right? And live a nice life under that and think, what's the problem? You know, I'm happy. You know, he's good to me. But that's different, and it's fragile, okay? So the son was an alcoholic and a gambler, and she eventually divorced him. This was a huge scandal. Can you imagine? At this time, about 1908. And then, you know, you divorce Ben Tillman's, son, what? And what the father did, the father of I'm getting ahead of myself. Ben Tillman and Lucy had 2 daughters, okay? And as they were divorcing, the son deeded the children to his father. Under South Carolina law, a father, and only a father, could deed children to someone else if he couldn't take care of them. Now, Ben Tillman did this for his own reasons. Probably he was, not able to take care of them. He was such an alcoholic and gambler, but also he didn't want Lucy to have those children, probably, because then the children were moved to Washington, D.C., where Senator Tillman lived, and the mother was not allowed to see them because she was a bad influence, according to the Tillmans. All right, the children's grandparents then became the children's owners. And the children, in order for Lucy to get them back, she had to go to court, okay? Now, at this time, okay, when do women win the right to vote? 1920. At this time, she can't vote. She's in a coverture system. Women are supposed to be seen and not heard, okay? And she sued United States Senator Pitchfork Ben Tillman, okay? Sued him, okay? Now, in that day and age, that's pretty brave. But let me remind you, she had resources. She had money. Her family supported her. And they already thought that Tillmans were no count, right? However, the law would be very different. This case was a cause célèbre in D.C., Washington, D.C., around the country, and especially in South Carolina. Many women took notice, okay, and said to themselves, what? You know what? This can happen to Lucy, Miss Lucy, or whatever they called her. This can happen to Lucy. She's a good woman from a good family, i.e. she's white. She's got money, all right? She's educated. She didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't the gambler or the alcoholic. She can't see her children. She has to go to court. But eventually, she won. And the case is called Tillman versus Tillman in 1910. Now, in social behavior, this is like a best test case, okay? If Lucy Triggs has this much trouble, right, and has all these privileges, right? If you don't have any of those privileges, or if one of the privileges is not there, then I pity you, right, in the system. So a lot of the women who thought, this system works for me, I'm on a pedestal, my protector is benign and wonderful, and I overlook what he does, you know, if he does anything I don't like, they stopped and they thought, wait a second, I don't want to be in Lucy's, you know, situation. And they realized, okay, and there had been a lot of movements that helped them realize this, like women going to schools, being educated. They realized that they were not the captains of their own fate, and that they would need rights. To get rights, they would need the vote. Okay, and so they started working even in South Carolina, even among the wealthy, you know, privileged people, for women's right to vote. Okay, but what I've already told you about race and social class prevailed as well. So they realized that they needed protection from their protectors. Okay? That being an agent of your own life is very different than being momentarily in a good situation. So what do we know about some of these women? I want to go to another woman and talk to you about race and politics. This is Mary McLeod Bethune, okay? How many of you have heard of her? Yay, Mary McLeod Bethune. Mary McLeod Bethune was born and raised in South Carolina. She was an awesome strategist in politics, very smart woman. She went around the Southeast and built schools. There's a college in Florida named after her, Bethune-Cookman College. Her portrait is in the lobby of the South Carolina State House. If any of you go there, look for it. She was the first African-American woman that I know of whose portrait was hung in anybody's state house, okay? And other black women made that happen. They said, you put up this portrait. Now, I put her here because she was a very good friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. She was one of the founders of the National Council of Negro Women. That was what it was called. She had connections all over this country. She had many skills. But because of white women's segregation, okay, in their groups, she was not welcome in their groups, right? So when they were working for, let's clean up the sewer system or whatever it might be, let's clean up the election system, they did it with a racial divide. That means that the old adage in politics, to divide and conquer, right, works in gender as well. So this is Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, one of the things is people's behavior. Okay, I want to talk about this, and then I'll be getting to the end. People's behavior, what they do and what they say they do, right? Have you noticed sometimes that there's a little difference sometimes? Okay, some people are really honest, okay, and they're doing what they say they do. But sometimes there's a little slippage there. And this is part of the master narratives, or part of the stories that are told, okay, about people. So when I first started teaching at USC, it was 1985 when I started teaching there, and I was in the part of the class where I talked about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And I mentioned in passing that Senator Strom Thurmond, who at the time was the senator still, that he had filibustered that bill. But then I told the students how the filibuster was broken and what happened. Okay, the labor unions, the civil rights movement, the religious community, women, all kinds of people, okay, who bore down on LBJ, and LBJ was nobody's fool, and he broke that filibuster, and the thing passed, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So then class broke up, and some students came up to me, some African-American students came up to me after class. I had been in South Carolina about 2 months, okay? I moved here from Wisconsin. And they said to me, Dr. Woliver, you know, of course, that Strom Thurmond has a black daughter. And I was like, I thought, what do I say? I said, are you sure? They were right. This is the cover of her book, okay? Her name was Essie Mae Washington Williams, okay? She was Strom Thurmond's oldest child. She was born from intimate relations between adult Strom Thurmond, who was a teacher at the time, I think he was 21, and an underage 15 or 16-year-old maid, okay, domestic worker, in his parents' house. He was living in that house, right? Now, this was during a period of time when miscegenation was a crime. This was a period of time, okay, when this knowledge would have been very troublesome to a very ambitious white male politician, okay? So here's the book. It's called Dear Senator, okay? The story's very interesting and very complicated. When Essie Mae Washington Williams told the world that she was Strom Thurmond's oldest child, which was a couple months after he died, people didn't believe it. And one South Carolina congressman, Joe Wilson, said at the time, he's quoted in the state newspaper as saying, she's lying. So I realized, okay, that I was a very naive white girl, right? And that I had no clue how a powerful white man in South Carolina could be protected by an entire state, that they could keep a secret that long. All right? So, also when I was growing up, I want to tell you another story. When I was growing up, some of you might remember this. You could go into a store. Often it was a gas station. You could go into a store, and next to the cashier's machine, there'd be a tin can, maybe a coffee can, a plastic bucket of some kind. Taped to it would be the picture of a darling little child. And it would say at the top, this child needs a blood transfusion, needs medical care, needs a wheelchair, needs a transplant, needs something. And people would put their coins in there, okay? This happened everywhere. This was when I was growing up, okay? And so this would be an example of people's behavior being very interesting, right? They didn't know this child. Okay, a lot of them were probably pretty poor and strapped for money, but they put their spare change or more than that into the can. Okay? But the thing about it to think about is those children had to be cute, right? The pictures of them, they were adorable, cute. There was something that pulled at your heartstrings, and you would put the money in. Now, it helped one child at a time, perhaps, okay? But what if you weren't a cute child? What if you weren't what's described as a worthy child? Okay, what if you weren't blonde and blue-eyed? What if your parents didn't have the time and resources to put those cans all around the community and beg for money from good people? And I want to say those people were good, okay, to do that. So there would be a lot of children who were sick, who needed a wheelchair, who needed cancer treatment, who weren't on those cans. And probably the money in the cans was not enough to save that family, okay? So I wondered, okay, about people's behavior. Now, today, we have a modern version of that. You know what I'm talking about? We have this thing on the internet called GoFundMe, right? And reports are that on the GoFundMe pages, more than half of the requests are from families asking for help with medical bills. If you listen to politicians talking about health care, they might mention this. You know, that this is the richest country in the world, they'll say, or whatever they're going to say. And more than half of the GoFundMe tin cans on the internet are because a family can't buy or get what they need, either for themselves or someone in their extended family. Now, what happened was those cans aren't around in the gas station so much anymore, I don't think, because someone decided to, what I call, go up the river, okay? And I'll come back to that. We used to have in the Congress the ability to work together, okay, bipartisanship. And so people thought, what should we do about these children, okay? And they thought maybe we should do something that's systematic, okay? So there is a parable that helps explain this. It's an African parable, okay? A lot of times parables help us understand human behavior. Did you learn, for example, I hope you learned about the parable, the emperor's new clothes, right? What's the emperor's new clothes about? You guys Google that, look it up on that Wikipedia thing, and see what it's about, okay? It's about someone saying the emperor is buck naked, okay? Right? Speaking the truth when no one else will, okay? So, the parable is this. Some men, and the parable goes this way. Some men, let's say people, some people are on a river bank and they're fishing. And they're having a good day, and they see a baby, human baby, come floating down the river, and it's drowning. They jump in the river, and together they save the baby, bring it up to the shore, bundle it, take it to safety. What is happening, they say, you know, glad we could save that baby. They fish. Another baby comes down the river. They do the same thing, okay? They do that all day long. And then more babies. Finally, one of the people says, you stay here, I'm going up the river. And the friends say, what, you're not going to help us save this baby? How these babies coming down the river? What kind of heart do you have? You're not my friend anymore, you know. What are you? And he says, I'm going up the river to see who is throwing our babies into the river. Okay? Now that's systematic. Okay? So what happened was there were too many children in America who didn't have, okay, basic health care. It mattered to a lot of people. And in a bipartisan effort, Senator Orrin Hatch, who was a Republican, very conservative Mormon leader in Utah, and Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, a Democrat, co-wrote and steered through the Senate, United States Senate, a program called CHIP, C-H-I-P. It's the Children's Health Insurance Program. It's an insurance program. You don't have to be cute, okay? You don't have to have blonde hair and blue eyes, okay? It's a program. It's a policy. And if you are a child in this country of a certain age with certain criteria, the Children's Health Insurance Program, okay, will cover you, okay? So that's the difference, okay? And that's an example of what I'm talking about, going up the river. So there's a lot of examples of going up the river. It used to be in this country that when you became old, unless you were very wealthy to begin with, it was a sentence to poverty. You didn't have a family that would take you in, okay, feed you, clothe you, bathe you, take care of you while you were sick and dying, okay, because all of us are mortal, although some people forget that. You were just in dire straits, okay? It was up to, liberalism was that it was up to you, okay, to take care of yourself. You had rights, but you took care of yourself, okay? So things like Social Security happened, Medicare. When I used to teach, I would tell my students, you know anything about Social Security or Medicare? They didn't, right? They knew more about, the Kardashians, and they knew about that. And I would say, okay, listen, you didn't have Social Security or Medicare. Your grandparents would be your roommates, okay? You want that? All right? And you might not be able to go to college because your family would be trying to help them, okay, without any Social Security or Medicare. Now, these are things that many scholars call America's hidden success. These are hidden success, like the hidden figures. Hidden. We don't know how well they work. And they do work. They are not perfect, okay? We are human, and our programs are not perfect, but they certainly help. Now, people say, well, after women got the right to vote, or were given the right to vote, won the right to vote, what did they do with it? They didn't do anything. And that also is not true, okay? Because in our politics, we often don't see what quiet, responsible, consistent people get done, all right? Because they're just doing it quietly without parades and fanfare, okay? Fireworks. Here's what women did, okay, after they started to vote in 1920. Sometimes they did this with black women, okay, but sometimes they did it as white women in a segregated system. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. In South Carolina, the first thing that women did was they threw down, shall I say, until the South Carolina legislature raised the age of consent. Okay, it was, you need to know what that means, okay? They raised the age of consent so that little girls, okay, would be protected from their protectors. All right? It was a law. You couldn't say that it was consensual, because by law it was not consensual. Keep your paws off these girls. Raise the age of consent, okay? They made sure that women were placed on juries. Women were not placed on juries in South Carolina until you ready for this? 67. So listen, when someone says he was convicted by an all-white jury in 1940, that's true. But you need to be more specific. He was convicted by an all-white male jury. That's the patriarchy, okay, in 1940. So any woman, Lucy Tillman, any woman, working class woman, okay, a poor woman who accused anyone of sexual assault, unfair wages, contracts that she had signed, okay? She, in South Carolina, would be in front of a jury that was all white men until there were black people on juries, okay, during the Civil Rights era, okay? So that, people don't even see that. What I'm telling you is people don't see gender, okay, and it's there. Male power is often a given, and if you voice it, if you say, that's not right, who's the troublemaker? The speaker, right? The Grimke sisters, big time trouble. Abigail Adams, big time trouble, okay? So they got women on juries. They changed women's citizenship status. They eliminated child labor. Now, this was not done only by women. This was done by women's votes, labor unions, religious people, progressives, reformers, farmers, okay, lots of people. They eliminated the convict lease system in the Southeast. They did things for the community, clean water, sewage systems, sidewalks, better roads, public hygiene and public health, inoculations, hookworm abatement, TB testing in sanitariums, public playgrounds, water fountains, orphanages, reform schools for boys and girls. Now, many of these public facilities would have been segregated before the Civil Rights Movement, right? So remember that. They made sure that people knew how to register to vote. Okay. Register to vote. You can walk out in that hallway and register to vote. I better not hear that you're not registered to vote. Okay, I pity you. They made sure that people knew how to register to vote. They gave information to anyone, okay? This would be even black people in their day and age, right? Anyone about the hours of the county clerk's office. They're open from this time to this time, bring this paperwork, how to study for the literacy test, how to pay a poll tax. Some of the churches would pay the poll tax so that someone could vote, okay? And they also did a lot of things to reform voting. Voting used to be all men, all white men in the Southeast, and they would vote in saloons, in hotel lobbies, in each other's parlors, at the office of an attorney, okay? The women said, "Ixday on that." I said, those are not neutral, that's not neutral territory. Okay, a woman walking into a saloon, okay, to vote, she's not going to do that. If she's a woman of color, it's going to be dangerous. We're not doing that. They had the facilities moved to neutral grounds, like the hallway of Winthrop right out here, right? And they also made sure that the voting was private, okay? They went through a long process to make sure that when people voted, your protector or your boss or your landlord did not have any way, unless you told him or her verbally how you voted, that it was your business, okay? Now, I'm going to wrap this up. In our present situation, we don't know a lot about these things that did good, okay, and that we benefit from now, okay? And we don't know about the depth of some of the harm that some of the people that we do know about did. So, for example, Ben Tillman, everyone knew, and he was proud of it, okay? He was very open about it, that he was a flat-out racist, okay? But people didn't know what a misogynist, right? He also was. It's interesting that often those two things go together, okay? Now, if someone is like Ben Tillman, they might believe that they are superior to other people. It's not just that someone else is not a full human being, but that they are superior, okay? And they apply that to their gender as well as their race, sometimes, not all the time. So it's interesting, codical to the story of Ben Tillman. Now today, what we have is a growing and very powerful philosophy called neoliberalism. Okay, liberalism, I taught you, is about rights, individual rights. Neoliberalism is a update of that, and it is about that the market can take care of everything. Okay, neoliberalism. You do not need governments. Okay, these programs. Okay, to clean the water, all right, or to do anything. If it is valuable to people, they will purchase it, okay? This is just a very thumbnail sketch of neoliberalism, okay? But it's part of a master narrative in many ways that doesn't see what a lot of people have done, okay? To build those schools, to pass the CHIP program, to pass programs like the Environmental Protection Act, to save things that they're never going to see in another part of the country, that they'll be dead and that act, they hope, will still be around. So neoliberalism is very, very interesting. Now I want to show you a couple of funny things just to end up here. This is a slide that tells you that South Carolina approved the 19th Amendment in, you ready? You see that? That is not a typo. 1969. Yeah. So of course women had the right to vote in South Carolina before 1969 because of federal power, right? But they symbolically, gestured and approved it in 1969. This woman is a president of the League of Women Voters of South Carolina, Eulalie Sally. And this woman, the woman without the hat, this is fascinating. She is a Republican representative from Greenville County, and her name was Carolyn Frederick. Okay, so it's interesting, right, that there she was. And I must say, what is also fascinating is the Republican Party for a long time was better on women's rights than the Democratic Party. Okay, and that's another whole lecture. So this pictured here is Governor Robert McNair, a Democrat, and League of Women Voters pioneer and leader Eulalie Sally, and Representative Carolyn Frederick, a Republican. And he is signing what I'm going to show you in a minute, which is South Carolina's approval of the 19th Amendment, right? Thank you very much, right? They approved the amendment. And here's what she said to him, okay? These are quotes. During the event, Sally was introduced to the General Assembly, and she said to them, "Well, boys," okay, she said, "Well, boys, I've waited 50 years to tell you what I think about you for taking so long to pass this." She added, "I've been a Democrat all my life with a capital D, but I finally had to get an awfully good Republican to get this through." As Governor McNair, a very powerful man, prepared to sign, Miss Sally, I would say, sassed him. Sassed him. She said to him, "We ought to throw all of you out." So here's a picture of what they signed. South Carolina ratified the 19th Amendment in 1969. And with that, I'll end, and I hope you have questions and comments.